Before sunset, a brass button no larger than a coin would place Miss Elspeth Loring within reach of ruin. At noon, however, it was only a loose gleam on the coat of a temporary footman, and Elspeth was only the poor relation arriving at Fenbridge Court with another woman's shawl folded over her arm. The house stood in Hampshire beneath a pale April sky, its stone front shining with the expensive calm of a place where disgrace never entered by the front door unless properly announced. Carriages rolled over the gravel sweep. Liveried servants moved between trunks and hat boxes. Ladies stepped down in silk pelisses with smiles arranged for inspection. Gentlemen spoke of roads and horses while mothers watched unmarried daughters with the bright patience of hunters. Everyone had come because His Grace Adrian Vale, 5th Duke of Alderwick, was expected before dinner, and no family with an eligible daughter meant to waste proximity to a duke. Elspeth had heard the rumour 3 times during the journey. The Duke was proud. The Duke was reclusive. The Duke might choose a bride this season if properly guided. Lady Penrith had spoken the last phrase with such satisfaction that Elspeth had looked out the carriage window to hide her expression. Men of great rank were not the only people who disliked being guided. They were merely the only ones allowed to say so. "Stand a little farther back, Elspeth," Lady Penrith murmured as a footman helped Viola from the carriage. "You are blocking the first impression." Elspeth stepped back at once. She had spent 2 years learning that obedience, when offered quickly, could sometimes pass for grace. Lady Penrith did not raise her voice. She had no need. Her authority was made of silks, relatives, favours, and the terrible generosity of having taken Elspeth in after her father's death. Elspeth was gentle by birth and inconvenient by fortune, which made her useful in precisely the way society preferred not to name. She could write seating cards because her hand was elegant. She could mend lace because her eyes were sharp. She could listen to complaints because no one feared her repeating them in a room that mattered. She could be included when family warmth needed witnesses and dismissed when rank required tidiness. "Mamma," Viola Penrith whispered, not softly enough, "must Elspeth hold my shawl like a maid? It makes the whole arrival seem dampened." Viola was beautiful in pale blue, with curls arranged to appear natural and a complexion that had never been taught humility. She was not cruel in the noisy way of women who lack breeding. Her cruelty had Polish. It smiled first. Lady Penrith adjusted Viola's glove. "Your cousin is here to assist, my love. Assistance should never draw the eye." Then she turned to Elspeth. "You understand, do you not?" "Yes, Lady Penrith," Elspeth said. "Of course. The words cost nothing. That was why they were required so often." Across the entrance hall, near the shadow of the servants' passage, a footman looked up. He was taller than the others by several inches, dark-haired, broad-shouldered, and too still. His livery was old-fashioned, the coat a little short at the cuffs and a little strained across the shoulders, as if it had been chosen from necessity rather than fit. Yet he did not carry himself like a man grateful for employment. He stood with a tray in his gloved hands and watched the entrance hall as though measuring the distance between what people said and what they meant. Elspeth noticed him noticing her. Then she looked away, because a woman in her position could not afford curiosity about any man, servant or duke. Inside, Fenbridge Court smelled of beeswax, lavender, coal smoke, and flowers forced to bloom in vases for the benefit of guests. The great hall had been dressed to look effortless, which meant every table, fern, and polished chair had been positioned with military purpose. Lady Penrith greeted arrivals with a warmth that could change temperature by rank. Lord Penrith stood near the stairs, laughing too loudly at Sir Barnaby Cresswell's remarks, while his eyes moved often toward the closed door of his study. Elspeth saw that too. She saw many things. It was safer than being seen. By mid-afternoon, the small rose drawing-room had become Lady Penrith's command post. Seating cards covered the satinwood table. Lists of names, grudges, precedents, rooms, and possible alliances lay in neat columns. Viola sat by the window with a book of verse open in her lap, though she had not turned a page in half an hour. Elspeth stood beside the table with a pen in hand. Lady Penrith dictated as if arranging dinner were a moral test other people were certain to fail. Lady Markham cannot be seated near Mrs. Ainsley. They disagreed over a subscription ball in Bath and have made a religion of remembering it. Sir Barnaby must sit far enough from the wine to remain amusing. Colonel Dacre may be placed beside Mrs. Ainsley because he is patient and deaf in one ear. Elspeth made the changes. Her handwriting moved evenly across the cards. Her thoughts did not. And where shall Miss Loring sit? Viola asked. The question carried innocence the way a pin carries a pearl. Lady Penrith did not look up. Wherever there is a gap. At breakfast, perhaps near the sideboard. One must be practical. A poor relation is one of the few blessings in a crowded house. She may be moved without offending anyone important. The pen paused for less than a heartbeat. Elspeth made certain it moved again before silence could betray her. It was not the first time she had been described as furniture with a Christian soul. It would not be the last. Shall I leave my card blank until the final arrangement? She asked. Viola gave a light laugh. How composed you are. Composition is often mistaken for agreement, Elspeth said before she could stop herself. The room cooled. Lady Penrith looked up at last. What did you say? Elspeth lowered her eyes, not in surrender, but in calculation. Only that a blank card may be useful until the table is settled. Lady Penrith studied her for a moment. See that usefulness remains your chief quality. At the doorway, there was the faint sound of a footstep checked too late. The tall temporary footman stood there with a coal scuttle in one hand, though the fire needed no tending. Lady Penrith's eyes narrowed. What are you doing there? The hearth, my lady, he said. His voice was low and controlled, with the careful plainness of a man remembering he should sound less educated than he was. Elspeth heard it. Lady Penrith heard it as well, but impatience mattered more than suspicion. Then tend it and go. Yes, my lady. He crossed the room. His movements were efficient, but not deferential enough. He did not shrink from the furniture. He did not apologize to the heir. He set coal upon the fire with unnecessary care while Lady Penrith returned to her lists. Viola watched him idly. Elspeth kept her eyes on the cards, though every instinct in her had sharpened. The coat was not Fenbridge livery. The brass buttons bore a nearly worn crest, so faint that most people would have missed it. Elspeth almost did. A bird. A narrow tower. Not Penrith. Not any house she knew. The Duke must be placed between Viola and Lady Markham at dinner, Lady Penrith said. It will suggest inevitability without vulgarity. Should inevitability wear pearls? Viola asked. Pearls, Lady Penrith replied. Sapphire suggest effort. The footman turned from the hearth. As he passed behind Elspeth's chair, the loose brass button at his left side gave way. It fell silently at first, then struck the polished floor with a small bright tap. Lady Penrith did not notice. Viola had returned to her reflection in the window glass. Elspeth bent as though retrieving a dropped card. Her fingers closed over the button. It was warm from his coat and heavier than it looked. The worn crest pressed against her palm. The footman stopped at the threshold. He did not turn, but the stillness in his shoulders told her he knew what had fallen and who had taken it. Lady Penrith spoke without looking up. Elspeth, do not drift. His Grace will not be impressed by a household that cannot manage a simple dinner table. Elspeth rose with the button hidden in her hand. No, Lady Penrith. I imagine His Grace notices more than people expect. At the doorway, the footman turned his head by the smallest measure. Their eyes met. This time, neither of them looked away at once. Then Elspeth dipped her pen, corrected the next card, and folded her fingers around the button like a secret that had not yet decided whom it would betray. By late afternoon, the brass button in Elspeth's pocket had acquired the weight of a secret, and every errand Lady Penrith gave her seemed designed to test whether secrets could make footsteps sound guilty. She had meant to return it as soon as the footman left the rose drawing-room. Instead, Lady Penrith had sent her to check whether the blue chamber had enough towels, to ask the housekeeper whether Lady Markham's maid might be moved 3 doors farther from the nursery stairs, and to copy 2 place cards because Viola disliked the slant of the letter V. At Fenbridge Court, nothing was too small to become a matter of rank. Nothing was too ordinary to be made dangerous in the right hands. Elspeth carried a folded list toward the servants' passage, where warmth rolled from the kitchen and the air held the mixed scents of coal smoke, yeast, lemon peel, and silver polish. Voices travelled differently below the grand rooms. They lost their manners. They struck stone and returned sharper. She had nearly reached the turn by the silver pantry when Lady Penrith's voice stopped her. "Do not stand there looking insulted. I asked you a question." Elspeth paused, her hand tightening around the list. Beyond the bench stood Lady Penrith in lavender silk, Viola at her shoulder, Mr. Crewe the butler rigid with distress, and the temporary footman in the old livery. His tray was gone. His hands were empty. The missing button left a small gap at his coat, and Elspeth felt the one in her pocket as if it had warmed against her. On the narrow table near the pantry door lay an open velvet case, its hollow interior shaped for an object no longer inside. "My lady," Mr. Crewe said, "the silver seal was accounted for after luncheon. I checked the case myself." "Then it vanished after luncheon," Lady Penrith replied. "And this man was where he had no business being." Viola tilted her head, pale curls shining under the passage lamp. "Perhaps he mistook the family silver for wages. It must be difficult for temporary servants to stand among so much value and remember none of it belongs to them." The footman did not lower his eyes quickly enough. Elspeth saw the mistake. So did Lady Penrith. A true servant, innocent or not, knew that humility was often safer than truth. This man looked too controlled, too still, as if accusation had not reached his conscience but had merely offended his judgment. "Your name?" Lady Penrith demanded. "Vale, my lady." The pause before the name was very slight. Elspeth heard it because she had spent years hearing what people tried not to say. Viola smiled. "Vale. How ambitious. Perhaps next he will tell us he is cousin to Alderwick." "Do not be ridiculous, Viola," Lady Penrith said, though amusement touched the edges of her voice. "His Grace may be peculiar, but I doubt even he scatters relations through other people's service passages." "I didn't take the seal," the footman said. The contraction sounded almost deliberate, as though he had remembered to roughen his speech one breath too late. Lady Penrith's gaze sharpened. "You will not address me as if we are equals." "I meant no disrespect, my lady. Respect is not measured by what you mean. It is measured by whether your betters are required to correct you." Viola stepped closer to the empty case. "Mamma, perhaps this is a useful lesson. Men in livery are not so different from men with titles. They behave properly only when someone cleverer arranges the world around them." "Viola," Lady Penrith murmured. This time the rebuke was pure theatre. "It is true," Viola said. "Everyone says the Duke of Alderwick hides at Rookmere Hall because society tires him. If he comes tonight, he will need guidance. If he does not, perhaps his reputation is grander than the gentleman himself." The footman's face changed so little that no one else seemed to notice. Elspeth did. The stillness in him grew colder, as if Viola had touched a door that should have remained shut. Elspeth knew what wisdom demanded. She should pass by. She should deliver her list. She should remain useful, grateful, and unseen. A dependent woman did not step between a hostess and her chosen target. Yet the hollow case lay open on the table, the butler looked trapped by obedience, and the man called Vale stood with empty hands while two women turned suspicion into sport. More than that, they had condemned an absent man because they believed absence made him safe to use. Elspeth stepped around the corner. The seal was not in his possession when he left the rose drawing room. The passage went silent. Mr. Crewe looked at her with startled relief. Viola's brows rose. Lady Penrith became dangerously calm. "Elspeth, this is not your concern." "No, Lady Penrith. It is only my witness." "Your witness?" Lady Penrith repeated the words as if they were an impertinence she had found on the sole of her shoe. "And what did you witness?" "He entered the drawing room to tend the hearth. He carried a coal scuttle. He crossed to the grate, then left. He did not go near the writing table." Viola gave a little laugh. "How carefully you observe, footman, cousin." The insult landed exactly where it was aimed. Elspeth felt heat rise beneath her collar, but she did not allow her hand to move to her throat. Shame became public the moment one reached to cover it. "I observe most things carefully," she said. "It is safer than being surprised by them." Lady Penrith took one step toward her. You forget yourself. No, Elspeth said, and her voice remained lower than her pulse. I remember my position very well. Viola's mouth hardened. Then remember it well enough not to defend a servant against your own family. Truth is not family property. The words were out before caution could soften them. Mr. Crewe looked down. The footman looked directly at her, and for one strange second the passage seemed to narrow until only his attention remained. Lady Penrith's smile thinned. How noble you sound. One might almost think you had nothing to lose. Perhaps that is why I know the value of what remains. And what remains to you? A conscience, my lady. The air went tight. Viola's cheeks coloured. Lady Penrith's eyes grew flat and bright. You will find conscience poor shelter when charity tires of being insulted. I have never found charity in false accusation. Lady Penrith's hand closed around the edge of the velvet case. Do not dress sentiment as justice. The Duke of Alderwick will not thank you for defending servants in my passage, nor for romantic speeches about a man you have never met. Men like him survive because the world is arranged before they enter it. Then perhaps people mistake his silence for permission, Elspeth said. If his grace is absent, he cannot answer the stories told in his name. That does not make the stories honourable. Viola stared at her. You defend him too. I defend the principle. Elspeth looked from Viola to Lady Penrith, then to the man in livery. No man should be condemned because those speaking are certain he cannot hear them. Not a servant. Not a duke. The word settled with dangerous softness. Lady Penrith's face promised that she would remember them. Viola's promised she would improve them into gossip. Mr. Crewe seemed to have stopped breathing. The footman bowed his head at last, but it did not look like submission. It looked like acknowledgement. My lady, he said. Lady Penrith turned on him. What now? I moved the seal. Mr. Crewe looked up sharply. You moved it. The case was near the table edge when I carried coal to the room. I feared it might fall. I placed the seal on the upper shelf inside the pantry and failed to inform Mr. Crewe. He spoke like a servant accepting fault, but the rhythm of his words belonged to a man choosing exactly how much truth to spend. Mr. Crewe hurried into the pantry. A moment later, he returned with the silver seal in his hand. It is here, my lady. Viola's expression tightened with disappointment before she hid it. Lady Penrith did not hide hers quickly enough. She looked at the seal, then at Elspeth, then at the footman whose guilt had dissolved too neatly to be useful. How fortunate, she said, that everyone beneath my roof is so eager to correct me. Mr. Crewe bowed. Shall I return it to the case, my lady? Do so. And see that temporary servants understand that unnecessary initiative is not a virtue. Her gaze moved to Elspeth. As for you, Miss Loring, I will speak with you later about the difference between kindness and impropriety. Yes, Lady Penrith. Viola passed close enough to murmur, you do collect unwise loyalties. Elspeth did not answer. She waited until Lady Penrith and Viola disappeared toward the upper passage and Mr. Crewe had retreated into the pantry with the recovered seal. Only then did the warmth of fear reach her knees. She had done it. She had spoken. More foolishly, she had spoken well enough to be remembered. The footman remained a few feet away, the old coat still missing its button. Why? He asked. His voice was quiet now. Less shaped for service. Elspeth turned to him. Because you had not taken it. You could not know that. I knew enough to know she had decided before she asked. His eyes rested on her face with an attention that made her want to step back and stand taller at the same time. You risked Lady Penrith's displeasure for enough. Her displeasure is not rare, Mr. Vale. Elspeth reached into her pocket and drew out the old brass button. Besides, you lost this. He looked at the button in her palm. The worn crest seemed almost alive in the passage light. His gloved hand lifted, then stopped before touching hers. You kept it. Only until I could return it. Why return it at all? Because a coat should not be left unmended merely because no one expects the wearer to matter. He took the button carefully. Their fingers did not touch. The care with which he avoided contact felt more intimate than carelessness would have done. You defend strangers very fiercely, Miss Loring. Only when everyone else finds it convenient not to. Something in his expression softened, then disappeared behind control. And the Duke? What of him? Do you often defend men you have never met? Elspeth looked toward the stairway where Lady Penrith had gone. No. But I dislike cowardice dressed as judgment. If his Grace is proud, let him answer for pride. If he is cold, let him answer for coldness. But let him answer for his own sins, not for inventions made by people who want his title within reach. The footman closed his hand around the button. For a moment, he seemed less like a servant than any gentleman Elspeth had ever met. Perhaps, he said, he would be grateful to know someone thinks so. Elspeth almost smiled, though caution stopped it halfway. Powerful men rarely require gratitude from women like me. His gaze did not leave hers. Perhaps powerful men require truth more than gratitude. Lady Penrith's voice rang faintly from the upper corridor, calling Elspeth's name with honeyed impatience. Elspeth gathered the folded list against her waist. Then I hope his Grace finds some before it is arranged for him. She turned and walked toward the stairs, feeling the footman's attention follow her through the passage. Behind her, Adrian Vale stood with the old button hidden in his fist and understood that he had come to Fenbridge Court seeking forged letters, but had found something far more dangerous to his plans. An honest woman. By the time Elspeth reached the upper corridor, Lady Penrith had already found 3 new ways to make usefulness resemble punishment. There were flowers to be counted, ribbons to be sorted, and a tray of calling cards to be rewritten because Viola had decided the first arrangement made her name look less graceful than it ought. None of these tasks sounded cruel when spoken aloud. That was why Lady Penrith preferred them. They left no mark except exhaustion and the steady knowledge that Elspeth's time was not considered her own. She stood in the little writing room while Viola held 2 lengths of ribbon against her gown and turned before the glass. Primrose suggests innocence, Viola said. Blue suggests refinement. Which do you think his Grace will find more difficult to resist? Elspeth dipped her pen and finished the curve of a capital P. I have never met his Grace. That has not prevented you from defending him. Viola's voice was light, but her eyes in the mirror were not. Lady Penrith, seated at the desk, did not look up from an account book bound in green leather. Elspeth has a sentimental habit of mistaking contradiction for virtue. I mistook nothing, Lady Penrith. The words were out before Elspeth could soften them. Her own courage startled her. Lady Penrith's pen stopped. Viola turned slowly. The room seemed to shrink around the 3 of them. You are tired, Lady Penrith said. Tired girls often speak beyond their station. Then I apologize for the station, not the truth. For 1 second, even Viola had no answer. Lady Penrith closed the account book with quiet care. You will take these cards to the housekeeper, then see whether the white narcissi have opened in the still room. If they have not, we shall use early roses. Viola must not carry anything that looks forced. Yes, Lady Penrith. Elspeth gathered the cards. As she did, her gaze caught on a dark red smear near the corner of the account book. Wax. Not much, only a rubbed crescent beside a folded scrap of paper. Near it lay a metal seal half wrapped in cloth before Lady Penrith moved her hand over it. Elspeth saw only an impression in the wax, a shape like a bird above a narrow tower, and then it was gone. Her fingers tightened around the cards. The same worn shape had pressed into the brass button now hidden in the hand of a man who called himself Vale. Is something wrong? Lady Penrith asked. Elspeth lowered her eyes. No, Lady Penrith. Only the ink on this card is not quite dry. Then do not smear it. Carelessness is the only fault poor women cannot afford. Elspeth curtsied and left, feeling the weight of that red wax following her down the corridor. Below stairs, the man Lady Penrith believed a temporary footman stood inside the still room with the door almost closed and the old brass button open in his palm. Adrian Vale, 5th Duke of Alderwick, had carried many dangerous things in his life. A dying father's debts. A mother's silence. A title that entered rooms before he did and altered every voice within them. Yet the button unsettled him more than it should have, because Miss Loring had returned it as if it mattered, and had defended him as if he did. Your Grace, said Mr. Eddowes from beside the shelves of folded linen. If you continue staring at that button, it may confess before Lord Penrith does. Adrian closed his fist around it. Has the second letter been placed? Yes. In Lord Penrith's study, beneath a stack of estate accounts. His man carried it there himself and looked frightened enough to be honest about being dishonest. Mr. Eddowes was dressed in plain dark clothes and passed in the household as an underservant temporarily borrowed from a neighbouring estate. He had served Adrian since Adrian was 19, and had disapproved of nearly every risk since with the loyalty of a man who considered worry a professional obligation. Adrian took the folded paper from him. The handwriting was his own, or rather a careful imitation of it. The forged lines were formal, restrained, and poisonous. My regard for Miss Viola Penrith is not a subject for public discussion until my arrival. You may assure Lady Penrith that I remember what has been privately understood. Adrian read the phrase twice. Privately understood. It was the sort of phrase society adored because it said nothing while doing damage. A clever trap, Eddowes said. Not clever enough. Clever enough if you arrive as expected, are greeted by half the county, and are informed that a young lady's hopes have already been allowed in your name. Adrian folded the letter. A gentleman may deny a rumour. A duke denying a lady before witnesses appears cruel before he appears honest. That is what they are relying upon. Adrian moved toward the small window. Through its narrow glass, he could see only a strip of gravel and the wheels of a carriage being unloaded. Fenbridge Court had the restless feel of a house performing innocence too carefully. How many here know my face? Mrs. Arden May. She visited Rookmere Hall before your father changed the livery. A few older guests may have seen you as a younger man, but you have avoided London long enough for rumour to replace memory. The younger guests know your title better than your features. And the servants. Fenbridge has taken on temporary staff for the house party. No one questions another pair of hands when there are 30 guests, 6 dinner courses, and Lady Penrith changing the flowers twice before tea. Adrian looked down at his coat. The old House Vale livery was too short at the wrist, but that imperfection had helped him more than Polish would have. People looked at ill-fitting livery and saw inconvenience, not power. All except Elspeth Loring. She had seen the button. She had heard the wrongness in his voice. She had looked at him as if truth could leak through cloth. Miss Loring noticed. Miss Loring notices a great deal, Eddowes replied. Which means Lady Penrith will notice her noticing. Adrian's hand tightened on the forged letter. She has already begun. Then we should remove Miss Loring from the line of fire. How? Adrian's voice sharpened. By declaring myself? Lady Penrith will burn every scrap of evidence and we will be left with gossip against gossip. By sending Miss Loring away? That will ruin her faster than accusation. A dependent gentlewoman dismissed from a house party becomes a story before she becomes a person again. Then what do you intend? To find the seal box. Eddowes hesitated. I believe it is in Lord Penrith's study. There is a locked drawer beneath the eastern window. His lordship keeps estate accounts there, and there is talk below stairs of creditors pressing harder than he admits. Debt explains haste. And Miss Penrith's promised dowry may not be as solid as Lady Penrith suggests. So they need a duke who can be made to appear committed before he can refuse. Adrian looked toward the passage. Somewhere above, Elspeth was carrying cards, ribbons, and other people's ambitions from room to room while the trap meant for him began to circle her feet. What did you learn of Miss Loring? He asked. Daughter of a gentleman. Father dead 2 years. No fortune. Taken in by Lady Penrith under family obligation. Treated as neither servant nor guest, depending on which indignity is most useful. Adrian said nothing. Silence had always been his shield. In that moment, it felt like cowardice trying on noble clothing. Eddowes studied him. She should not be made a sacrifice to your proof, your grace. No, Adrian slipped the forged letter inside his coat. She will not be. Above stairs, Elspeth reached the still room with the flower list and found the door open, the shelves empty of all but the scent of linen, herbs, and lemon peel. The white narcissi had not opened. Their tight green buds stood in a blue bowl, pale and stubborn. Elspeth touched one gently and thought of Viola asking which colour might best make a duke believe himself fortunate. Then she heard a step behind her. The temporary footman stood at the threshold. The button had been reattached, but badly, with dark thread pulled crooked through the old cloth. "Miss Loring," he said. "Mr. Vale." She looked at the button before she could stop herself. His gaze followed hers. "It is not well mended." "No," she said. "It is not." A faint change moved near his mouth, almost a smile, quickly restrained. "You are direct. Only with thread. People are less forgiving. You saw something in Lady Penrith's room." The quiet accuracy of it chilled her. "That is a dangerous habit of yours. Asking. Knowing before you ask." He did not deny it. Elspeth lowered her voice. There was red wax near her account book. A seal wrapped in cloth. "I saw only a shape." "What shape?" She should not answer. Yet she had already stepped beyond safety in the servants' passage, and silence had not protected her there either. A bird over a tower. His face went still. Too still. "You must be careful what you notice." That sounds like advice from someone who has already noticed too much. It is. Footsteps sounded overhead, brisk and feminine. Viola's laugh floated down the back stair. Elspeth gathered the flower list, feeling the corridor's invisible walls close around them. "If you are in danger here, Mr. Vale, you should leave before dinner." His eyes held hers with a gravity that made the air seem thinner. "And if the danger is not for me alone?" Before she could answer, Lady Penrith called her name from above, sweet and sharp as a bell. Elspeth stepped back. "Then I hope you tell the person who shares it enough truth to survive." She left him standing beside the unopened narcissi. Adrian watched her go, the old button crooked over his heart, and knew the forged letters were no longer the only reason he could not afford to leave Fenbridge Court. By breakfast the next morning, Elspeth understood that Lady Penrith had not forgiven her. The knowledge came not through raised voices or visible punishment, but through the careful rearrangement of small things. Her bell was not answered for 20 minutes. The gown sent to her room had been brushed, but not pressed. Viola's maid arrived twice to ask whether Elspeth had seen a ribbon that had never been missing. Then, just as the household gathered in its polished morning order, Lady Penrith kept Elspeth in the passage with a list of corrections until the breakfast room had nearly filled. It was a gentle delay. That made it worse. Gentle cruelties could be explained away as mistakes. Fenbridge Court's breakfast room shone with pale April light. Silver pots gleamed along the sideboard. Toast racks steamed. China cups stood in disciplined rows while guests entered by habit, rank, and appetite. The room smelled of coffee, warm bread, and orange marmalade. Gentlemen spoke of road conditions as though England itself had been arranged for their opinion. Ladies exchanged remarks about sleep, weather, and the expected arrival of His Grace with the false ease of people who had come to breakfast already dressed for competition. Elspeth paused at the threshold and searched for her card. She found Viola at the centre of the unmarried ladies, glowing in primrose muslin. She found Lady Penrith at the head of the table, serene as a woman whose plans had risen before dawn. Then Elspeth found her own name. Miss Loring. It rested near the sideboard, not among the gentlewomen, not below stairs, not entirely excluded, but placed where everyone could understand she had been included without being valued. The seat was at the narrow end, between a widowed companion and an empty chair left for servants when hot dishes were passed. It was not technically wrong enough to challenge. That was the skill of it. A woman could be humiliated by inches in a room full of good manners, and no one need ever admit a blade had been drawn. Elspeth walked to the seat. She Saturday. She unfolded her napkin. She did not look at Lady Penrith, because dignity sometimes consisted of refusing to show a wound to the hand that had made it. "Miss Loring," said Sir Barnaby Cresswell from midway down the table, "you have been given a most convenient station this morning. Half guest, half servant. You may report on both worlds with unusual authority." A few guests laughed. Not many. Enough. Elspeth lifted her eyes to him. Sir Barnaby was red-faced, hearty, and dressed in the confidence of a man who had mistaken his own comfort for wit. "I fear I would disappoint both worlds, Sir Barnaby," she said. "I have neither the efficiency of a servant nor the leisure of a guest." Mrs. Arden, seated near Lady Penrith, hid a cough behind her napkin. Viola's smile became thinner. Sir Barnaby chuckled, uncertain whether he had been answered or corrected. Very neat. Very neat indeed. Still, there are advantages to being movable. A hostess must bless any lady who can be placed anywhere. I am sure Lady Penrith is grateful for all blessings, Elspeth said. Lady Penrith looked up. Elspeth reads too much. It gives dependent young women an appetite for phrases. Dependence gives one an appetite for many things, Elspeth replied softly. Phrases are among the least expensive. The table quieted. It was not enough to become scandal. It was enough to be heard. At the wall near the servants' door, the temporary footman stood with a coffee pot in his gloved hand. The old brass button had been fastened again, but badly. The dark thread pulled the cloth crooked over his chest. Elspeth noticed it before she could stop herself. He noticed her noticing. Their eyes met for a breath, and the room seemed to divide into what was spoken and what was understood. Coffee, miss? He asked when he reached her chair. His voice was properly lowered now, but the Polish beneath it had not vanished. Thank you. He poured with steady hands. As the dark stream filled her cup, he murmured, You're not obliged to answer fools. The words were nearly lost beneath the clink of silver. They should have startled her. Instead, they steadied something she had been trying not to feel. Nor are fools obliged to recognize themselves, she replied, without moving her lips enough for anyone else to notice. For the first time, his face nearly changed. Not a smile. A restraint around one. Then he moved on. Lord Penrith entered late with his hair too carefully smoothed and his expression too brisk. He apologized vaguely to the room, kissed Lady Penrith's cheek, and took his seat. His gaze flicked once toward the servants' entrance, then toward the footman, then quickly away. Elspeth saw Lady Penrith see it. She also saw Mr. Crewe appear at the door with a folded note in hand and an expression grave enough to make Lady Penrith set down her cup before he spoke. He bent beside her chair. His whisper was intended for her alone. The table heard only fragments. His Grace's household. Precedence. Correction. Lady Penrith's face did not change at once. It became still, which was more revealing. Now, she asked. Yes, my lady, Mr. Crewe said. The direction was delivered with the morning post from his Grace's man. Viola turned sharply. Lord Penrith's knife struck his plate with a small sound. Lady Penrith recovered with admirable speed. How thoughtful of his Grace's people to concern themselves with domestic arrangements before his arrival. The direction concerned seating during his Grace's expected stay, Mr. Crewe said, now loud enough for those nearest to hear. It states that gentlewomen of family connection are to be seated according to birth and relation, not household convenience. The silence that followed was exquisitely painful. Elspeth did not move. She could feel the eyes turning toward her seat by the sideboard, then away, then back again. Sir Barnaby's complexion deepened. Mrs. Arden's expression sharpened with interest. The footman stood behind Lord Penrith's chair, eyes lowered so completely that he could not have looked more suspicious if he had stared outright. Lady Penrith's smile returned, thin and bright. There must have been some misunderstanding. Undoubtedly, my lady, Mr. Crewe said. His tone held the courage of a man carrying another's authority. Miss Loring, your card appears to have been misplaced. May I ask you to take the chair beside Mrs. Arden? The chair beside Mrs. Arden stood among the unmarried gentlewomen and respected older guests, not high enough to flatter, not low enough to insult. It was simply correct. Elspeth rose. The room watched her walk from the sideboard to the table proper, and with every step she felt the small reversal press against the earlier shame. It was not triumph. It was restoration. Restoration could hurt too, because it reminded a person how deliberately she had been diminished. She sat beside Mrs. Arden, who tilted her head and regarded her with eyes that looked capable of seeing through lace, lies, and old family arrangements. Miss Loring, the older lady said, I am told you wrote the seating cards. Only from Lady Penrith's direction. A safe answer. Not necessarily a useful one. Elspeth folded her hands beneath the table. Useful answers depend upon whether one wishes to preserve peace or prevent offence. Mrs. Arden's mouth curved. Excellent. Then advise me. Lady Markham and Mrs. Ainsley are both expected at dinner. One has rank. The other has temper. Which should sit nearer the fire? Elspeth felt the table lean toward the answer. Viola watched her with narrowed eyes. Lady Penrith did not look up from her plate, which meant she listened with all her might. The footman had returned to the wall. Elspeth felt his attention like warmth from a candle kept just out of sight. Rank should have the warmer chair, she said. Temper should have the better listener. Place Lady Markham by the fire, Mrs. Ainsley beside Colonel Dacre, and the rest of the table may survive both comfort and complaint. Mrs. Arden laughed once, soft and delighted. My dear, that is the first sensible thing said in this room all morning. The sound loosened the room. A few guests smiled. Sir Barnaby studied his coffee. Viola turned her face toward the window. Lady Penrith resumed conversation with great care, but the balance had shifted. Not enough to defeat her. Enough for her to feel it. Elspeth lowered her eyes to her plate, not from shame this time, but because unexpected recognition could be harder to bear than mockery. She had been heard. At the wall, the man in the ill-fitting coat looked toward the pale morning beyond the window, but not before she saw his expression. He was not amused. He was proud. The realization struck her so gently that she almost wished it had not come at all. Pride from a servant should not matter. Pride from this servant felt like a dangerous gift. And as Viola's gaze moved from Elspeth to the old brass button at his chest, Elspeth understood that danger had seen the gift too. By the hour before dinner, Elspeth had learned that being restored to a proper chair could be more dangerous than being denied one. The morning's correction had travelled through Fenbridge Court faster than spilled wine through linen. No one spoke of it directly, because directness was unfashionable when cruelty had failed, but Elspeth felt the altered air. A lady who had overlooked her at breakfast now asked whether she preferred tea with lemon. Sir Barnaby Cresswell bowed with exaggerated care when passing her in the hall. Mrs. Arden gave her a look of dry approval over the top of a letter and said nothing, which somehow meant more than praise. Lady Penrith meant it to mean nothing. She kept Elspeth busy enough to remove all leisure from the victory. There were visiting cards to sort, chamber candles to count, a torn flounce of Viola's evening gown to inspect, and a message to carry to the housekeeper about the exact shade of flowers for the music room. No lilies, Viola said, standing before the long glass while her maid adjusted her sleeves. They make me look too pale. You are never pale, my love, Lady Penrith said. You are delicate. Viola glanced toward Elspeth through the mirror. Some women must rely on delicacy. Others rely on being pitied. Elspeth threaded a needle and said nothing. Silence, in Lady Penrith's rooms, was often the last rent she could pay for peace. When the flounce was repaired, she was dismissed with a basket of mending meant for the still-room passage, where the light was better and the servants would not wonder why a gentlewoman had been given work fit for hands below stairs. That was Lady Penrith's compromise. Elspeth might be humiliated, but never in a way that could be proved. She sat on the bench near the linen press, where late afternoon sun fell through a high window and turned the dust in the air to drifting gold. The passage was not private. A maid crossed it carrying folded towels. A footman hurried by with a tray of clean glasses. Somewhere below, cook's voice rose over the clatter of pans. Elspeth chose the open place deliberately. She would not give Viola any corridor shadows to improve into scandal. She had just set one of Viola's gloves aside when a familiar dark sleeve appeared at the edge of her vision. The temporary footman stood near the window, holding his coat closed with one gloved hand. The old brass button hung by a single crooked strand. It has failed again, he said. I noticed at breakfast. I had hoped no one had. Then you have chosen the wrong house party for hope. His eyes moved toward the basket. May I ask whether your needle is available for a desperate cause? A batten is rarely desperate. This one has been through a great deal. Through poor sewing, certainly. The corner of his mouth shifted. I deserve that. Elspeth looked down the passage. No one lingered. Still, propriety had sharp ears. Stand there, by the window. Do not come nearer than necessary. He obeyed at once. That obedience, more than any boldness, unsettled her. Most men used compliance as condescension when a woman of lesser fortune made a request. Mr. Vale obeyed as if boundaries deserved to be believed. Elspeth rose and held out her hand. "Give me the button, if the thread will allow it." He removed it carefully and placed it in her palm. This time his glove brushed the edge of her finger. It was nothing. Less than nothing. Yet both of them stilled as if the passage had drawn a breath. Elspeth sat again before the moment could become visible. The button lay against her needle case, old brass dulled by years of handling. Its crest was clearer in the window light. A bird with wings raised above a narrow tower. She turned it once. "This is not Fenbridge." His answer came after the briefest pause. "No, and it is not new." "No, does it belong to His Grace's household?" The question hung between them with all the danger of a door left open. Mr. Vale looked toward the far end of the passage, where the turn led toward the pantry. "I serve His Grace's interests." "That is not the same as serving in his household." "No." Elspeth drew the thread through the first hole. "You answer very little for a man who asks others to notice a great deal. I asked you to be careful what you notice. That is worse." He lowered his voice. "Miss Loring, there are people in this house who will use any small kindness against you. I have observed that people need no kindness before they invent a charge. Kindness merely gives them prettier material." She pulled the thread tight. "Why keep a button from old livery?" "Because old things are sometimes harder to counterfeit than new ones." That made her look up. "Counterfeit?" He seemed to regret the word, but not enough to retreat from it. "You saw red wax yesterday?" "Yes." "If you see it again, do not touch it." "You speak as if I wander through houses picking up dangerous seals for amusement." "You picked up this." "It fell at my feet." "And you returned it." "Was I not meant to?" "Most people would have kept it until it became useful." Elspeth finished the second stitch. "Then most people have mistaken usefulness for character." His gaze rested on her bent head. She felt it, warm and restrained, and hated that she felt it. Men like him were not safe merely because they wore livery. Perhaps especially not then. "You think well of people who have given you little reason to do so," he said. "No. I think accurately of people until they correct me." "And have I corrected you?" The needle paused. In the open passage, with servants passing at distances that should have made the question harmless, it sounded almost intimate. "Not yet," she said. "But you are trying." Before he could answer, a movement near the stair turned them both. Viola stood half in shadow at the upper landing, one hand on the rail, her pale evening gown not yet fastened at the back. Her expression was not shock. Shock would have been kinder. She looked as if she had found precisely the thing she had expected to find, though she could not yet know what it meant. "How industrious," she said. Elspeth did not drop the button. She did not snatch back her hands. She continued the stitch and tied the thread cleanly. "Your glove is mended, Viola. I was repairing this before returning it." "This?" Viola descended 2 steps. Her eyes moved from Elspeth's needle to Mr. Vale's coat. "A servant's button?" "A torn coat reflects poorly on the household," Elspeth said. "Does it?" Viola smiled. "How fortunate we are to have you guarding the dignity of the passage." Mr. Vale bowed. "Miss Loring has done only a practical kindness, miss." "Did I ask you?" The softness vanished from Viola's face. "No, miss." His reply was correct. Too correct. Viola heard the difference and stored it away. Elspeth held the button out to him. "There. It should hold." He accepted it, but his eyes remained on Viola. "Thank you, Miss Loring." "Yes," Viola said. "How touching. Mamma will be interested in how generously you spend your time." She turned and went back upstairs, her slippers silent on the carpeted steps. For several seconds, neither Elspeth nor Mr. Vale spoke. The passage had not changed, but the air had. What had been a small courtesy now had witnesses. What had witnesses could be shaped. Elspeth placed her needle back in its case with hands that did not tremble because she refused to let them. "You should go," she said. "She will make something of this." "I know." "Then why are you still standing here?" "Because you should not be left to meet it alone. That is a noble sentiment for a man who will be below stairs when it arrives." The words came sharper than she intended. His face tightened, not with anger but with recognition. "You are right." That admission disarmed her more than defense would have done. "Mr. Vale." "Yes?" "If your danger belongs to His Grace, then it is not mine unless someone places it in my hands." He looked at the button now fastened to his coat. "They already have." Lady Penrith's voice called from above before Elspeth could answer. A moment later, the lady herself appeared at the head of the stairs, smiling with dreadful calm. "Elspeth, there you are. Leave the mending. I have a small task that requires discretion." Viola stood behind her mother, eyes bright. Elspeth rose, every instinct in her drawing tight. Lady Penrith came down 2 steps and held out a sealed note. The paper was thick. The wax was dark red. The seal had been pressed too firmly, leaving the edge cracked. No name appeared on the outside. "Take this to the East Corridor," Lady Penrith said. "Place it on the table near the chamber prepared for His Grace's arrival. Do not hand it to anyone. Do not ask questions." "And, Elspeth?" "Yes, Lady Penrith. Try to remember that discretion is often the only virtue left to women with uncertain futures." Elspeth took the note. The cracked red wax lay against her glove like a warning that had finally found its envelope. Behind her, the man in livery had gone very still. The sealed note seemed heavier with every step Elspeth took toward the East Corridor. It should not have. It was only paper, wax, and Lady Penrith's command, yet it lay in her gloved hand as if it contained not words but a future already arranged without her consent. Fenbridge Court had grown louder with dinner preparations. Doors opened and closed. Servants crossed the passage with warming pans and linen. Somewhere in the music room, Viola laughed at something Sir Barnaby had said, the sound bright enough to make innocence appear effortless. Elspeth kept walking. The chamber prepared for His Grace stood at the far end of the East Corridor, apart from the rest of the guest rooms, with fresh flowers on the pier table and a silver candlestick polished to a hard shine. Lady Penrith had chosen the place well. A note left there would not be public enough to be innocent, nor private enough to be impossible to find. It would wait like a trap with good manners. Elspeth stopped before the small table. The red wax seal stared up at her. The edge had cracked during Lady Penrith's careless pressure or careful design. No name marked the outside. No direction. No hand to claim it. Only a seal too like the one she had seen near Lady Penrith's account book. Elspeth told herself to place it down and walk away. Obedience would be easy. Obedience usually was. It was the cost afterward that proved expensive. She laid the note on the table. Then she stood there, unable to remove her hand. A servant passed at the far end of the corridor. Elspeth waited until the steps faded. The cracked seal had opened by a hair's breadth. It was no longer truly sealed. A note without a name, already broken, left near the Duke's chamber by a dependent woman who had been seen mending a servant's button. The story almost wrote itself. That was what frightened her. Lies made by clumsy people often required effort. Lady Penrith's lies required only that others accept the shape she had prepared. Elspeth lifted the note again. "Forgive me," she whispered, though she did not know to whom she spoke. To propriety. To caution. To the woman she had been that morning, before she learned how quickly a kind gesture could become a weapon. She opened the fold. The handwriting inside was careful, slanted, and feminine, but not Viola's in any natural way. It tried too hard with the loops. Elspeth had copied enough of Viola's name on seating cards to know the difference between a hand and its imitation. "My dear Duke," the note began. She read the first line and felt cold move through her. "You cannot think I have misunderstood what passed between us, not after Mamma assured me your silence was only discretion. If you come to the East Chamber before the musicale, I shall know you mean to make honourable what has already been privately understood." Elspeth lowered the page. The corridor seemed very still. Privately understood. The phrase from rumour, from Lady Penrith's hints, from every calculated smile. If found in the wrong place, the note would not prove love. It would prove expectation. It would give Lady Penrith a sorrowful daughter, a trapped duke, and a dependent cousin near enough to blame if anything went wrong. A board creaked behind her. Elspeth folded the note at once, but did not drop it. Mr. Vale stood at the turn of the corridor, a covered candle tray in his hand, his face sharpened by alarm. "Miss Loring," he said softly. "That shouldn't be in your hand." "No," she replied. "It should not be on this table either." His gaze moved to the cracked wax. "Did Lady Penrith give it to you?" "You know the answer before asking again." "I know what I fear." "Then fear correctly." She held the note closer to her waist. "This was meant to be found." "Give it to me." The command was quiet. That made it more dangerous. Elspeth's chin lifted. No, his eyes changed. "Miss Loring, you don't understand the risk. I understand that a servant asking me for a letter meant for a duke is not safer than a hostess ordering me to plant one." He looked as if she had struck the exact place where truth hurt most. "I can protect you from this." "Can you?" The question came out sharper than pain alone could explain. "With whose authority?" He did not answer quickly enough. Elspeth's breath tightened. There it was again, that gap between the man he appeared to be and the man who spoke as if doors opened because he expected them to. "Mr. Vale," she said, lowering her voice, "if you serve His Grace's interests, tell His Grace someone is using his name. But I won't hand you a note that may later be said to have passed improperly between us." "Then what will you do?" "Return it to the woman who gave it to me. That may put you in greater danger." So would obeying her. He set the candle tray down with careful control. "You should not have to make that choice." "No. But here it is." For a moment, the corridor held them in a silence that felt almost like trust and not enough like safety. Then Lady Penrith's voice sounded faintly from below, calling for Viola's gloves. The spell broke. Elspeth refolded the note along its original crease. "If I am wrong, I have been impertinent. If I am right, I have been useful. You are more than useful." The words left him before caution could prevent them. Elspeth looked at him. The air between them changed again, but this time she stepped back from it. "That is a generous thing for a servant to say." He bowed his head. "And a dangerous thing for anyone to mean." Elspeth did not ask what he meant. She could not afford another answer without a name. She turned from the Duke's chamber and walked back toward Lady Penrith's rooms with the unopened-looking note held visibly in her hand. Each step felt like tearing thread from a seam before the gown split. Lady Penrith was in Viola's dressing room when Elspeth entered, fastening a sapphire clasp at her daughter's throat. The room smelled of powder, orange blossom water, and heated silk. Viola sat before the glass with her curls pinned high, lovely enough to make any accusation against her seem ungenerous. Lady Penrith saw the note at once. Her eyes flickered, then smoothed. "That was quick." "I did not leave it." Viola turned sharply. "What?" Lady Penrith's hand stilled at the clasp. "You misunderstood me." "No, Lady Penrith." Elspeth placed the note on the dressing table. "I understood too well." The room hardened around the words. Lady Penrith smiled. "You opened it." The seal was cracked. "That is not an answer." "It is the only answer I have." Viola snatched the note and opened it, then looked at her mother with panic beneath anger. "Mamma." "Be silent." Lady Penrith took the paper from her. "You have made a very foolish decision, Elspeth. I could not place that near His Grace's chamber." "Could not." "Would not." "You live under my roof." "Yes." "Your allowance comes through my hand." "Yes." "Your father left you nothing that can shelter you from your own pride." The words were meant to shame her. They did. But shame was not command. "My father left me his name," Elspeth said. "It is not much, but it is not for sale." Viola rose, her color high. "You think yourself so noble because you have nothing." "No," Elspeth said. "I think a person with nothing must be careful what she becomes in order to keep it." Lady Penrith folded the note slowly. Do not mistake stubbornness for virtue. This was a harmless test of discretion. It was a lie. It was strategy. It would have bound his Grace to an understanding he did not make. You know nothing of what his Grace has made. Then let him speak for himself when he arrives. Lady Penrith moved closer. And who will speak for you, Elspeth, when I say you were found wandering near his corridor with a note in your hand? Viola's eyes brightened. The shape of the next lie entered the room before anyone said it. Elspeth felt fear, clear and cold. She did not move. If you say that, it will be false. False things become persuasive when spoken by the right people. Lady Penrith's voice softened. You have been treated with generosity. Do not force me to reconsider whether Fenbridge remains suitable for you. Elspeth looked at the note, then at Viola's reflection, then at Lady Penrith's calm face. I can't be part of a false understanding with his Grace. Lady Penrith's expression changed at the contraction, the living human refusal inside it. Then you will learn what happens to women who refuse protection. Protection does not require dishonor. No, Lady Penrith said. But survival often does. Elspeth curtsied because her legs needed something formal to do before they weakened. Then I will have to survive without that kind. She left before Lady Penrith dismissed her. In the passage beyond, the air felt colder and cleaner. She did not see Mr. Vale standing in the shadow near the turn, partly hidden by the open door of the linen closet. He had heard enough. Inside Viola's room, Lady Penrith spoke in a voice meant to remain private. Do not look frightened, Viola. By morning, the house will believe Elspeth Loring wanted the Duke for herself, and every defense she makes will sound like proof. The words followed Elspeth down the corridor, though she could not hear them clearly. Adrian did. He stood motionless in borrowed livery, the crooked brass button against his chest, and understood that Lady Penrith had stopped trying to trap only him. Now she meant to erase the woman who had refused to help her do it. By the time the musicale began, Elspeth understood that Lady Penrith had not waited for morning. The rumour had arrived before the first song, dressed in silk and carried on the gentlest voices. It moved through the drawing-room under the cover of compliments. A glance toward Elspeth when the east corridor was mentioned. A pause when Mr. Vale passed with a tray. A little silence after Viola laughed too lightly at the word discretion. No one accused Elspeth outright. That would have been crude, and Lady Penrith never used a knife when a ribbon would do. The music room at Fenbridge Court had been arranged for elegance. Candles burned in mirrored sconces. The pianoforte stood open beneath a vase of forced roses that had obeyed better than the narcissi. Chairs faced the little platform where Miss Viola Penrith would sing before dinner, wearing primrose silk and the sapphires Lady Penrith had chosen to suggest inheritance rather than effort. Guests gathered with their programmes and polite expectations. They spoke of Handel, Italian airs, and his Grace's delayed arrival, as if the Duke's absence had become a character in the room. Elspeth stood near Mrs. Arden, not close enough to claim protection, but close enough to feel the comfort of a woman who seemed to listen through walls. Mrs. Arden leaned on her cane and watched the room with displeasure sharpened into amusement. You are very pale, Miss Loring, she said. Is it the music or the company? I have not heard the music yet. Then we shall blame the company until evidence improves. Elspeth almost smiled. Across the room, Lady Penrith saw the exchange and chose that moment to move. She touched Viola's arm, and Viola turned toward two young ladies near the mantel with an expression of reluctant concern. I shouldn't say anything, Viola murmured, just loudly enough to be overheard. Only Mamma is so distressed. One does not like to see family forget what is owed to family. One of the ladies leaned closer. Has something happened? Viola lowered her lashes. Nothing certain. That is always the trouble. Uncertain things can be so much worse than open ones. Lady Penrith approached with perfect timing. Viola, my love, do not distress yourself. Miss Loring is young, and young women without proper guidance may mistake attention for kindness. Elspeth felt the room change. Conversation thinned. The first singer had not yet begun, but everyone had turned inward, toward Scandal's warmer fire. Mrs. Arden's eyes narrowed. What an interestingly shaped remark, she said. Lady Penrith gave a sad little smile. You are too kind to notice household anxieties, Mrs. Arden. On the contrary, I notice them with increasing appetite. Sir Barnaby Cresswell drew nearer, unable to resist. Household anxieties, Lady Penrith? Surely not before music. Viola pressed a hand to her throat. It concerns a note. Elspeth's fingers went cold inside her gloves. Lady Penrith looked pained. A private note intended for His Grace's chamber appears to have been mishandled. A murmur passed through the room. The phrase private note did more damage than any accusation could have done. It invited every listener to become an author. Mishandled by whom? Sir Barnaby asked. Lady Penrith hesitated with theatrical reluctance. Her eyes moved toward Elspeth and away again. I had hoped to spare her. Elspeth stepped forward before fear could fasten her to the carpet. Then do not spare me. Say what you mean, Lady Penrith. Several women drew in breath. Directness was a social crime when practiced by the vulnerable. Lady Penrith's face softened, which meant she had struck precisely where she wished. My dear child, I am trying to protect you from your own confusion. No, Elspeth said. You are trying to make confusion do the work of accusation. Viola's colour rose. You were seen near the east corridor. Because I was sent there. And near the servants' passage. Because your gown, gloves, and errands have required me in half the passages of this house. A faint sound moved through the room. It might have been sympathy. It might have been appetite. Lady Penrith lifted one hand. This is painful, but perhaps necessary. Miss Loring has been observed in repeated conversation with the temporary footman who calls himself Vale. She was seen mending his coat in a passage where discretion might have advised otherwise. A note meant for His Grace was not placed as directed. It passed through her hands. I fear that disappointment, dependence, and romantic fancy have led her into conduct she herself may not fully understand. Elspeth heard every word. Each one struck cleanly because each had been polished from something true. She had spoken to Mr. Vale. She had mended his button. She had held the note. That was how Lady Penrith built lies. Not from nothing, but from facts stripped of their souls. Summon the footman, Sir Barnaby said, eager and embarrassed by his eagerness. Let the man answer. That will not be necessary, Elspeth said. Lady Penrith's eyes brightened. Afraid of what he may say. The servant's door opened before Elspeth could reply. Mr. Vale entered with a tray of wineglasses, called perhaps by Mr. Crewe or perhaps by design. The old brass button held at his chest, its dark thread visible even in candlelight. He took in the room at once. The gathered guests. Elspeth standing alone. Lady Penrith poised like Mercy. Viola trembling with practiced injury. For one suspended moment, his gaze met Elspeth's, and she saw the decision rise in him like a flame behind glass. He might reveal himself. He might end it. The room would fall at his feet, and every whisper would choke on its own surprise. Instead, he set the tray down and bowed. You sent for me, my lady. Elspeth felt something inside her give way. Not trust entirely. Not yet. Only the part of trust that had believed he would not leave her unnamed before wolves. Lady Penrith turned to him with controlled sweetness. You have been seen in conversation with Miss Loring. Yes, my lady. More than once. Yes, my lady. Did she give you a note? No, my lady. Did she ask you to carry one? No, my lady. Did she seek private familiarity with you? His eyes flickered once toward Elspeth. No, my lady. Viola's voice sharpened. You are very loyal for a temporary servant. I am answering truthfully, miss. Truthfully. Lady Penrith repeated. Then tell us why Miss Loring mended your coat. Because a button had fallen. And why did that concern her? He lifted his head by the smallest degree. Because Miss Loring has the uncommon habit of correcting what others find convenient to leave broken. The room went still. Mrs. Arden's mouth tightened in approval. Elspeth's throat ached, because the defence was beautiful and not enough. Lady Penrith sensed the danger and moved quickly. A poetic servant. How rare. Perhaps Miss Loring has encouraged you to imagine yourself her champion. No, my lady. Then explain why she defended you yesterday when my silver seal was misplaced. Because I hadn't taken it. And she knew this by instinct. She knew you had accused before you had proof. A stronger murmur now. Lady Penrith's eyes flashed. Adrian had gone too far for a servant. Elspeth saw it, and fear for him struck through her own humiliation. Mr. Vale, she said quietly. Enough. He turned to her, and the pain in his face was gone so swiftly she wondered if she had invented it. Lady Penrith seized the moment. How touching. She commands him already. Viola looked around the room, her voice quivering with manufactured shame. And all while his grace is expected under this roof. How could you, Elspeth? There it was. The story Lady Penrith wanted. Poor relation desires a duke, flirts with a footman, mishandles a note, mistakes pity for romance. Elspeth stood in the centre of it and felt every eye ask whether poverty had made her ambitious enough to forget herself. She could deny the pieces forever and still be trapped inside the pattern. So she stepped out of the pattern entirely. If I meant to climb, she said, and her voice carried farther than she expected, why did I defend the only man here believed to have no power? The question cut through the room and left no polite answer behind. Sir Barnaby looked down. One of the young ladies pressed her handkerchief to her mouth. Viola's lips parted. Lady Penrith went very still. Mr. Vale did not move, but the brass button at his chest seemed to catch the candlelight. Elspeth turned to the guests, not pleading, not explaining, simply standing where they had placed her and refusing to bow beneath the weight of their suspicion. I returned Lady Penrith's note because it contained a false understanding with his grace. I spoke for Mr. Vale because he was accused unjustly. These are not the actions of a woman arranging an advantage. They are the actions of a woman refusing to help others arrange a lie. Lady Penrith's voice dropped. You will regret that speech. Perhaps, Elspeth said. But regret is cleaner than complicity. No one applauded. No one moved to embrace her. This was not a victory sung in public warmth. It was something narrower and more dangerous. A silence in which people began to fear they might have listened too willingly. Lady Penrith turned away first, which told Elspeth she had landed a blow. Viola's eye shone with fury. Sir Barnaby busied himself with his programme. Mrs. Arden tapped her cane once against the floor, a small sound that felt like judgment. Mr. Vale bowed to Lady Penrith and withdrew toward the servants' door. He did not reveal himself. He did not save her with rank. But as he passed, his gloved hand closed over the old brass button at his chest as if something there had begun to burn, and Elspeth understood that whatever truth he carried, it was now hurting him to keep it hidden. The room did not recover from Elspeth's question. It merely learned how to behave around it. The musicale continued because society preferred broken things to remain accompanied by music, but every note afterward sounded thinner than the last. Viola sang an Italian air with too much feeling and too little breath. Sir Barnaby turned pages he did not read. Lady Penrith smiled until the corners of her mouth looked painful. Elspeth sat beside Mrs. Arden with her hands folded and her pulse beating in her throat, aware that she had not won safety. She had only made the lie work harder. When the final song ended, guests rose in cautious clusters. Some avoided her eyes. Some looked at her with new interest, which was not the same as kindness. Mrs. Arden leaned closer. Do not go anywhere alone tonight, Miss Loring. Elspeth glanced at her. Is that advice or warning? Both, when properly aged. Before Elspeth could answer, Lady Penrith crossed the room with Viola behind her. The softness in her face had vanished. Elspeth, you will come with me. For what purpose? The question seemed to shock several people nearby, though Elspeth had spoken gently. Lady Penrith's voice became lower. You are not in a position to ask purposes. Mrs. Arden tapped her cane once. Every gentlewoman is in a position to ask why she is being removed from a room. Lady Penrith turned with a smile too thin to bear weight. My dear Mrs. Arden, this is a family matter. Then it should be improved by a witness. Viola's eyes flashed. A witness? Surely you don't imagine Mamma means to harm her. I imagine very little, Mrs. Arden said. That is why I prefer seeing. Lady Penrith's nostrils flared, but too many guests had heard. She could not refuse without making the refusal more interesting than the scandal. As you wish. Miss Loring has become fond of witnesses tonight. Elspeth rose. She saw Mr. Vale at the servant's door before he looked away. His face was calm in the way a locked gate was calm. He did not move toward her. Instead, he murmured something to Mr. Crewe, who had entered with the wine tray. The butler's expression tightened. Within moments, Mr. Crewe stepped into Lady Penrith's path and bowed. My lady, forgive me. There is a matter regarding Miss Loring's chamber. Lady Penrith stopped. What matter? A maid was sent to remove Miss Loring's trunk to the old nursery room. Elspeth's stomach dropped. The old nursery lay in the north wing, unused and cold, far from the occupied chambers. It was the sort of room given to someone one wished to call sheltered while making her feel banished. Lady Penrith's eyes moved toward Viola. That was my direction. Yes, my lady. I have delayed it. The butler's courage cost him visible effort. Mr. Vale reminded me that any alteration to Miss Loring's room tonight may appear improper after the remarks made before guests. With Mrs. Arden willing to stand witness, it may be best that no trunk be moved and no search be made except before proper eyes. Lady Penrith looked past him to the footman. Mr. Vale reminded you. Adrian bowed from the doorway. Only that servant should not carry a gentlewoman's possessions through dark corridors while there is gossip in the house, my lady. The answer was humble enough to survive. Barely. Lady Penrith's gaze was not. How thoughtful you have become. A household runs more quietly when there is nothing to explain. Mrs. Arden gave a small cough that might have hidden a laugh. Lady Penrith could not openly object, not with half the room pretending not to listen. Very well. The trunk remains. Elspeth, you will sleep in your own chamber tonight. Mrs. Arden may satisfy herself that you have not been mistreated, since Charity now requires an audience. Charity often improves when watched, Mrs. Arden said. Elspeth followed them into the corridor, but before they reached the stairs, a maid hurried toward Lady Penrith and whispered. The words did not carry, yet the result did. Lady Penrith's eye sharpened with sudden calculation. In the morning, she said. Not now. Leave it where it is. The maid curtsied and fled. Elspeth saw Adrian hear it. His jaw tightened by a fraction. After Mrs. Arden retired to fetch her shawl from the drawing-room, Elspeth found herself momentarily alone in the narrow linen passage beside the stair. She should have kept walking. Instead, she turned when she heard his step. Adrian stood 6 feet away, careful of distance, the old brass button dark against his coat. You should not be here, she said. No, yet here you are. I asked Mr. Crewe to leave your trunk untouched. I heard. And Mrs. Arden will remain near you tonight. I heard that too. The steadiness of her own voice surprised her. Am I meant to thank you? He looked at her fully. No, that answer struck more deeply than any expectation would have done. Elspeth folded her hands around the edge of her shawl. You protected me. I tried. You protected me as one moves a chair away from a fire. Carefully. Usefully. Without asking whether the chair wishes to remain in the room. Pain crossed his face, quickly controlled. That is not how I see you. But it is how you have handled me. I cannot tell you everything. That much is plain. If I reveal too soon what I know, Lady Penrith will destroy the proof before it can be tied to the person who made it. And in the meantime... Her voice lowered. In the meantime I am whispered over, moved about, accused, corrected, shielded, and still not trusted with the truth. He took a half step forward, then stopped himself. I do trust you. No. You trust my character. That is not the same as trusting me with yours. The words landed between them and left no graceful path around them. Somewhere below, a clock struck 10. The sound travelled through the walls like a measured warning. Miss Loring, he said, and for the first time the name sounded as if it cost him restraint, there is more at stake here than my pride. There is my name. Yes. Then do not speak to me as if I have only begun to understand stakes because you noticed them. He bowed his head. Not as a servant. As a man corrected. You are right. The admission did not heal the hurt, but it kept it from hardening. Elspeth looked away because his humility was becoming as dangerous as his secrets. Lady Penrith means to you something in the morning. The maid whispered, and she said to leave it where it is. I heard. Do you know what it is? I suspect. But you will not tell me. If I am wrong, I may frighten you for nothing. Elspeth almost laughed. It came out like breath over glass. How kind. To be accused in ignorance is much more comfortable. He flinched then. Only slightly. Enough that she regretted the cruelty and kept the truth. I deserve that, he said. Yes, she replied. You do. Footsteps sounded. Mrs. Arden's cane approached along the corridor. Elspeth stepped back. Tomorrow, if Lady Penrith wishes to accuse me, she may do it before witnesses. That is dangerous. So is disappearing. I did not mean for you to disappear. Then stop arranging shadows for my safety. Mrs. Arden appeared at the corner and looked from one to the other with an expression that missed nothing and forgave little. Miss Loring, your chamber. Elspeth turned to follow her. Adrian remained where he was, hands at his sides, every concealed truth pressing against the borrowed livery. The next morning's weapon was waiting before dawn. Elspeth found it because she did not sleep. Near the bottom of her trunk, beneath a folded shawl she had not placed there, lay a small iron seal box wrapped in plain cloth. Its lock bore scratches around the keyhole. Dark red wax clung to one corner. For a moment, all sound left the room. Then Mrs. Arden, who had kept her word and slept in the adjoining dressing room, opened the door and saw Elspeth standing over the trunk. Do not touch it, the old lady said. Elspeth had already drawn her hand back. Her fear had become very still. No, she said. This time, I won't be found hiding beside their evidence. Mrs. Arden's face softened by one stern degree. What will you do? Elspeth looked at the seal box, then at the window where morning had begun to pale the glass. I will ask Lady Penrith to say my guilt in a room full of people. And if they believe her? Elspeth lifted her chin. Then at least they will have to hear me before they do. Outside in the corridor, footsteps paused and then retreated quietly. Elspeth did not know whether they belonged to servant, spy, or secret protector. She only knew that protection without truth had become another cage, and by morning she meant to open it herself. At dawn, Elspeth found that someone had ordered a carriage for her. It waited near the side entrance where guests did not pass, its wheels dark with wet gravel and its lamps still burning against the pale hour. Her trunk stood beside it, strapped and ready, though Mrs. Arden had forbidden anyone to touch it after the seal box was found. The little iron box had been removed only as far as the dressing table, where it sat under the old lady's watch with the accusing patience of an object placed too carefully to be believed. Elspeth stood at the window and looked down at the carriage. For one weak, human moment, she imagined stepping into it. No morning room. No Lady Penrith's sorrowful face. No Viola's trembling performance. No guests weighing poverty against virtue as if the two could not sit in the same chair. A road. A closed door. Distance. Then she saw the truth beneath the kindness. The carriage was still a decision made around her. It did not matter whether it had been ordered by a cruel hand or a protective one. It offered safety in exchange for disappearance. Mrs. Arden, wrapped in a grey shawl and looking like a general who had slept in a chair by choice, followed her gaze. That is a soft-looking trap. Do you think Lady Penrith sent it? No. Lady Penrith would send you away in daylight if she thought she could make humiliation visible. This was done by someone who dislikes cruelty but still believes he may arrange other people's exits. Elspeth closed her eyes briefly. Mr. Vale. So I suspect. He meant to help. Many people mean to help. The question is whether they remember to ask the person being helped. Elspeth turned from the window. The gown she wore was plain dove grey, brushed as well as tired cloth could be brushed, with cuffs she had mended herself. It was not armor, but it was clean. Her hair had been pinned simply. Her hands did not shake until she put on her gloves. Mrs. Arden saw and said nothing. That silence was a kindness too. A knock came at the outer door. Not Lady Penrith's sharp rap. Not a maid's nervous tap. Elspeth opened it before fear could instruct her otherwise. Mr. Vale stood in the corridor, still wearing the old livery, the brass button crooked but secure at his chest. His face changed when he saw she was dressed for the house, not the road. "The carriage is ready," he said. His voice was low. "So I observed. Mrs. Arden would travel with you if you wished. You would be taken to Winchester first, then wherever you choose. Your trunk would follow under her seal. No one here would be able to accuse you in a room arranged against you. And everyone here would be able to say I fled before I could answer. Not everyone. Enough." He stepped back as if the word had struck him. "I did not intend to move you without consent. Then why was my trunk already beside the carriage?" The corridor held the question. He looked toward the floor once, then back to her. "Because I feared you would refuse if I asked." "You were right." His jaw tightened. "Miss Loring, Lady Penrith has planted a sealed box in your chamber. She means to use it. Then let her use it where others can see how clumsily it was placed. That is a risk no one should ask of you." "No one is asking." She drew her shoulders back. "I am choosing it." Something in his face altered, and for an instant the servant seemed to fall away. What remained was a man who wanted to command and knew he had lost the right to do so. "If this carriage was meant as rescue," Elspeth said, "it has misunderstood me. Then let me stand with you. You may stand where truth places you. You may not place me first." He bowed his head. "As you wish." The words should have belonged to a servant. They did not. Mrs. Arden came to the doorway with her cane. "Good. Now that everyone has discovered Miss Loring owns a will, perhaps we may proceed before Lady Penrith improves her expression in a mirror." The morning room was already occupied when Elspeth entered. That did not surprise her. Lady Penrith preferred witnesses when she believed they belonged to her. The curtains had been opened to grey light. Tea had been set out and ignored. Lord Penrith stood near the mantel with the careful discomfort of a man whose house contained more truth than furniture. Viola sat beside her mother, pale and rigid, one hand closed around a handkerchief. Sir Barnaby Cresswell hovered near the bookshelves, pretending he had entered by accident and stayed by duty. Two young ladies from the house party sat together on the sofa, eager to look reluctant. Mr. Crewe stood by the door. Mr. Vale remained just outside it until Mrs. Arden looked over her shoulder and said, "Come in, man. If you have been useful in shadows, you may as well be visible in daylight." Lady Penrith's eyes flashed at the command, but she smiled at Elspeth. "My dear child, this is unnecessary." Elspeth walked to the centre table. "Then it will be brief. I ask you to state plainly what you mean to accuse me of." Viola drew in a breath. Lady Penrith's smile trembled with injured patience. "Accuse is a harsh word. It is the honest one." "Very well." Lady Penrith lifted a folded handkerchief to her lips. "A seal box belonging to Lord Penrith's study was discovered among your belongings. A private note intended for His Grace's chamber passed improperly through your hands. You have been seen in repeated conversation with a temporary footman. In charity, I hoped confusion explained it. In sorrow, I fear ambition may." Sir Barnaby lowered his eyes. One of the young ladies whispered, then stopped when Mrs. Arden turned her head. Elspeth placed the cracked note on the table. "This is the note. I opened it because it bore no name and the seal was already broken. I read enough to understand that it implied a private understanding between Miss Penrith and His Grace. I refused to plant it near his chamber and returned it to Lady Penrith." Lady Penrith's face hardened by a degree. "You admit opening private correspondence." "I admit refusing to place a lie." "You call it a lie because you are jealous." "No. I call it a lie because it needed a hidden corridor to survive." Lord Penrith shifted. Elspeth turned to him. "My lord, did you send me with that note?" "I did not." "Did His Grace?" "Certainly not." "Then the note's journey depended on Lady Penrith's instruction and my obedience." I withdrew the obedience. The room changed. Not enough to acquit her. Enough to disturb the shape of guilt. Lady Penrith moved quickly. And the seal box? Mrs. Arden spoke before Elspeth could. Untouched since I saw it found. Placed beneath a shawl in Miss Loring's trunk with all the delicacy of a stage prop. The lock is scratched. The cloth has red wax at one corner. If Miss Loring intended theft, she has developed a remarkable fondness for arranging evidence where even sleepy old women may trip over it. A nervous cough escaped Sir Barnaby. Lady Penrith's eyes narrowed. You make light of serious matters. No, Mrs. Arden said. I make serious matters clearer. Elspeth reached into the small pocket at her waist. There is one more thing. Mr. Vale looked at her then. She did not look back. If she did, she might falter. She drew out the memory of the object rather than the object itself, because the button had long since been returned. The temporary footman's coat bore an old brass button with a crest I did not know. A bird above a narrow tower. I first found it in the Rose drawing room. I returned it to him after Lady Penrith accused him over the silver seal. Later, I mended it in the passage, where Miss Penrith saw me. Viola's cheeks flushed. You see? She admits it. I admit kindness in an open passage, Elspeth said. You supplied the shame. Mrs. Arden sat forward. A bird above a tower, did you say? Mr. Vale had gone very still. Elspeth looked at the old lady. Yes. Not Fenbridge. No, and not Penrith. No, Mrs. Arden's gaze moved slowly to the footman by the door. I saw that crest at Rookmere Hall many years ago, before the old Duke changed the household livery. House Vale used it on brass before the morning alterations. The word struck the room with more force than an accusation. Viola turned toward Mr. Vale. Lord Penrith's hand tightened on the mantel. Lady Penrith rose. Mrs. Arden, you are mistaken. I am old, Lady Penrith, not ornamental. Elspeth felt the floor seem to shift beneath her. House Vale. Rookmere Hall. The old livery. The footman who spoke too carefully, moved with too much command, knew too much danger, and looked at a duke's name as if it belonged under his skin. Slowly, Mr. Vale stepped forward. He unfastened the crooked brass button from his coat and placed it on the table beside the cracked note. His gloved hand rested there for one breath. Then he lifted his head. Mrs. Arden is not mistaken, he said. Lady Penrith's face emptied. Elspeth could not breathe. The man in borrowed livery looked once at her, and in his eye she saw apology before truth. The button is mine. For a moment, the sentence had no meaning because the room could not bear what it had been given. The button is mine. Elspeth heard the words strike the table, the cracked note, the seal box, and every face that had looked at her with guarded suspicion. Then the man in borrowed livery removed one glove with slow precision, as if the smallest movement deserved the dignity of truth. He laid the glove beside the old brass button and lifted his head. The posture changed first. Not dramatically. Not like an actor throwing off disguise. Something quieter happened, and therefore more terrible. The deference left his shoulders. The careful plainness left his voice before he spoke. He became, before their eyes, a man whom rooms were accustomed to obey. Lady Penrith gripped the back of the nearest chair. This is absurd, she said. Some servant's prank cannot be permitted to frighten a respectable household. Mrs. Arden did not look away from him. Then let us end the fright. Say your name. He turned to her with grave respect. Adrian Vale, 5th Duke of Alderwick. Viola made a small broken sound. Sir Barnaby's face lost its colour, then gained too much of it. One of the young ladies pressed both hands to her mouth. Lord Penrith stepped backward so abruptly that his heel struck the fender. Mr. Crewe bowed at once, not in surprise but in confirmation, and that told the room he had known enough to be afraid. Lady Penrith did not curtsy. For once, breeding failed her because calculation arrived first. Your Grace, she said, recovering the title as if it were a handkerchief snatched from the floor, had you announced yourself, every courtesy in this house would have been placed at your disposal. I know, Adrian said. That is why I did not announce myself. The answer silenced even the clock. Elspeth stood near the table with Mrs. Arden's hand resting lightly on the back of her chair beside her. She felt the floor beneath her slippers, the tightness of her gloves, the weight of every word she had said to him while believing him powerless. She had defended him. She had warned him. She had challenged him. She had trusted him enough to speak truth and not enough to ask the question that might have saved her from this moment. He had been the Duke all along. The man she had thought endangered by ranklessness had carried the highest rank in a house beneath a badly fastened coat. Relief should have come. Vindication should have come. Instead, hurt arrived first, quiet and deep, because her honesty had stood uncovered while he remained hidden. Adrian looked at the room, then turned to her before anyone else. "Miss Loring, I owe you the first apology." Lady Penrith drew breath as if to protest. He did not look at her. "You defended me when you believed I had nothing to give you. You defended a servant accused unjustly, and you defended an absent duke against slander. I allowed you to speak truth before a man whose name I withheld. I believed proof required silence. That belief placed you in danger. I am sorry." The apology did not ask for admiration. That made it harder to dismiss. Elspeth's throat tightened. "You let me be honest while you remained concealed." "Yes. Lady Penrith used my dependence. You used my ignorance." A murmur moved through the room, shocked less by the accusation than by the fact that she had spoken it to a duke. Adrian accepted it without flinching. "Yes." The single word steadied her and wounded her at once. Lady Penrith seized the opening. "There, Your Grace. Even Miss Loring understands the difficulty. You entered my house under deception. You listened where no gentleman was invited to listen. You encouraged disorder below stairs and now ask this room to accept you as witness against your hostess. Surely you see how irregular this is." "Irregular," Mrs. Arden said, "is a pale word for what has occurred under this roof." Lady Penrith ignored her. "My daughter has been distressed. My household has been unsettled. My poor cousin has been flattered into imagining herself significant to matters beyond her station. If Your Grace wished to avoid rumor, this disguise has created more of it than any mother could have done." Viola lifted her chin, her eyes bright with wounded pride. "You let us speak before you as if you were no one. It isn't honorable to trap ladies into embarrassment." Adrian turned to her. "Miss Penrith, I trapped no one into words she did not choose." Viola flushed. Lady Penrith's hand closed over her daughter's wrist. Adrian looked back at the room. "I came because letters were sent in my name implying a private understanding with Miss Penrith. I gave no such understanding. I wrote no such promise. When I received the first letter, I suspected ambition. When the second repeated phrases never used by me, I suspected design. I entered this house quietly because rank alters truth. I wished to hear what people said when they believed the Duke absent and the servant beneath consequence." "And what did you hear?" Mrs. Arden asked, though her face suggested she already knew. Adrian's eyes moved once to Elspeth, then away, as if he would not make her the subject of feeling before hostile witnesses. "I heard Lady Penrith accuse without proof. I heard Miss Penrith mock servants and speak of arranging me before I arrived. I heard Miss Loring refuse a false note meant for my chamber. I heard her defend the only man here believed to have no power." The words did not warm the room. They stripped it. Sir Barnaby looked at his shoes. The young ladies glanced at Elspeth and then at Lady Penrith, seeing the story rearrange itself with painful speed. Lord Penrith cleared his throat. "Your Grace, surely much may be explained by misunderstanding. House parties are fertile ground for unfortunate impressions." "So are debts," Adrian said. Lord Penrith went still. Lady Penrith's eyes flashed. "That is beneath you." "No. What is beneath me is allowing Miss Loring's name to bear the weight of a scheme built around mine." He placed the folded note beside the brass button. "This paper is not Miss Loring's disgrace. It is evidence that someone wished a lie to be found near my door." Lady Penrith gave a short laugh. "Evidence? A note she admits opening? A button from a costume you chose? Your Grace, this is not justice." This is theatre conducted from below stairs. Theatre requires an audience willing to believe what it sees, Adrian replied. This morning, Lady Penrith, you assembled one. Elspeth felt the room shift toward him. Power had entered, and power was persuasive. She hated that. She also needed it, and that hurt worse. Lady Penrith is wrong in one thing, she said. Everyone turned. Even Adrian. Your disguise did not create her cruelty. It revealed it. Lady Penrith's face hardened. How quickly you ally yourself with rank when it favors you. Elspeth looked at her steadily. I allied myself with truth when it did not. Mrs. Arden's cane tapped once against the floor. It sounded like a verdict held in reserve. Adrian drew a breath, and the authority in him became deliberate rather than instinctive. Miss Loring's conduct is honourable. She did not plant the note. She did not steal the sealed box. She did not pursue me, as servant or duke. She corrected injustice when silence would have been safer. Any person repeating otherwise after this morning will not be spreading gossip. They will be contradicting a witness who heard and saw enough to answer. Lady Penrith smiled with brittle courage. And do you mean to keep us prisoner until all answer as you wish? The trap was clever. Elspeth saw it. So did Adrian. He did not step into it. No, Lady Penrith. I ask that no one depart until this matter is answered. Any departure before then will be understood in society as unwillingness to stand by one's testimony. The distinction was mild. The force beneath it was not. Sir Barnaby nodded too quickly. The young ladies sat very still. Lord Penrith looked toward the window as if the road had receded. Lady Penrith's composure cracked at one corner, then sealed itself. How noble! A duke's request with a duke's consequence. Yes, Adrian said. At last, I speak as myself. He turned to Elspeth then, and the room seemed to recede, though every eye remained upon them. I cannot ask forgiveness for a truth I delayed until it served my purpose. I can only promise that the next truth will not be hidden from you. Do not promise me next truths, she said. Name the first lie properly. His eyes did not leave hers. The first lie was that you were powerless because this house treated you as if you were. The answer struck through her anger so cleanly that she had to look away. Outside, wheels sounded on the gravel sweep. A carriage had arrived. Lord Penrith startled. Lady Penrith's gaze moved sharply toward the window. Adrian did not. My solicitor has come from Winchester with the correspondence I received, he said. But before paper speaks, this room has heard enough to know one thing. He looked from Lady Penrith to Viola, then to the guests who had so recently enjoyed uncertainty. Miss Loring is not to be diminished again in order to make another person's lie easier to carry. Elspeth stood with the brass button, the note, and the eyes of Fenbridge Court before her, and understood that truth had entered the room at last. Trust had not. That would require another kind of courage. The carriage on the gravel brought no dramatic rescue, no officers, no public thunder of judgment. It brought a thin, precise gentleman in a dark travelling coat, carrying a leather dispatch case and looking as if he preferred facts to people because facts were less inclined to improve themselves. Mr. Peveril was shown first to Lord Penrith's study, where the door closed behind him, Adrian, and Mr. Eddowes, who had appeared at last without the posture of an underservant. The rest of Fenbridge Court waited under the unbearable strain of manners. Tea was poured and left untouched. Lady Penrith sat in the drawing-room with Viola beside her, receiving glances as if they were condolences and returning each with a look that warned against premature mourning. Lord Penrith did not sit at all. He stood by the window and watched the drive as though another carriage might arrive to carry away the consequences of the first. Elspeth did not remain with them. Mrs. Arden took her to the small morning parlour across the hall and placed herself in the chair nearest the door. You will not be left where pity and suspicion may take turns at you, the old lady said. Sit, child. Standing upright is admirable, but knees were invented for occasional practicality. Elspeth sat because refusal would have been pride, not strength. Her hands rested in her lap. The gloves were clean, but one seam near the thumb had frayed. She fixed her eyes on that small imperfection because the room was easier to face in pieces. The Duke of Alderwick had apologized before witnesses. he had restored her name, or begun to. He had also proved that every conversation she had trusted was missing its foundation. She had warned a duke to flee his own danger. She had spoken sharply to a man who could make and unmake half the county's invitations. Worse, she had believed herself safe with him because she believed him powerless. The wound was not that he was powerful. The wound was that he had let her offer him truth while he offered her shadows. A knock sounded. Mrs. Arden looked toward the door. "Enter, unless you have come to be ornamental." Adrian entered in dark morning dress, no livery, no borrowed humility, no jewel or flourish to soften the severity of who he was. He bowed first to Mrs. Arden, then to Elspeth. "May I speak with Miss Loring under your protection?" "You may speak," Mrs. Arden said. "Whether you improve matters is not guaranteed." "I understand." He waited until Elspeth inclined her head before taking the chair opposite her. Even seated, he seemed careful not to fill the room with rank. It was the first courtesy she had not had to ask for. "Mr. Peveril has brought what I needed," he said. "Letters sent in imitation of my hand, a record of a creditor pressing Lord Penrith, and a notation that the old House Vale seal was requested from a silversmith under false pretence 6 months ago." "Then you can finish this," Elspeth said. "I can finish part of it." His eyes held hers. "Not this." Mrs. Arden made a sound that might have been approval if one were generous. Elspeth folded her hands tighter. "You said in the morning room that the first lie was that I was powerless because this house treated me so." "That was elegantly said." "It was true. It was also incomplete." He bowed his head slightly. "Yes." She had not expected him to yield so quickly. It made the next words harder. "Was I useful to you, Your Grace?" The title came out colder than she intended. He accepted that too. "Yes." Pain moved through her, though she had asked for honesty. "I see. But not only useful. Men often add kindness after use and expect the order to be forgotten." His hand tightened on the arm of the chair. "You should not forget it." "I do not ask you to." She looked up then. "Did you see me before I became evidence?" The room went very quiet. Adrian's answer did not come quickly. That gave it weight. "Yes," he said. "In the entrance hall, before the button fell. You stepped back because Lady Penrith told you that you were blocking another woman's first impression. You did it without surrendering your dignity to the command. Later, you corrected seating cards no one would thank you for correcting. You noticed Lord Penrith's unease when everyone else noticed Viola's gown. You saw servants as people before it became noble to say so. I came here for forged letters. I noticed you before you touched any of them." Elspeth wished the words had been flatter. Flattery could be set aside. Specific truth entered more quietly and stayed longer. "And still you did not trust me with your name." "No, why?" "Because my name changes people." His voice was low, not pleading. "It makes mothers generous, daughters accomplished, gentlemen agreeable, servants terrified, and friends uncertain of whether they are friends or dependents. When you spoke to me without it, I wanted one honest thing to remain unaltered. That was selfish." "Yes." "And unfair." "Yes." "And dangerous for me." His face tightened. "Yes." The repetition should have angered her. Instead, it deprived anger of something to strike. Mrs. Arden's cane rested across her knees like a judge's staff. "Promising start," she said. "Continue bleeding honestly." Adrian reached inside his coat and withdrew a folded paper. He placed it on the table between them, then moved his hand away from it at once. "This is not payment. It is not compensation. It is not a request for forgiveness disguised as generosity. It is a settlement drafted in your name, to be administered by Mrs. Arden or another trustee of your choosing. Enough to give you independence from Lady Penrith's household and from mine. You may go to Bath, London, or any place where you have protection. You may refuse to see me again after today. No condition follows it. No gratitude is expected." Elspeth stared at the paper. She had imagined rescue as a carriage, a door opened by someone stronger, a hurried escape from accusation. This was different. This was a key placed on a table and not pushed into her hand. You think independence can repair what happened? No. I think dependence was the chain they used. I can at least remove my hand from it. And if I accept this, society will say I was bought into silence. Then I will say before society that you accepted what should have been yours before anyone made charity a weapon. She looked at Mrs. Arden. The old lady's expression had softened in a manner so severe that most people would have missed it. Take the choice seriously, Mrs. Arden said. Not because he offers it, but because it is yours. Elspeth touched the paper but did not lift it. I will not leave before Lady Penrith answers. Adrian's eyes changed. Not with surprise. With fear controlled by respect. You do not have to stay for that. I know. If you do, she will strike again. She already has. Then let me stand in front of you. No, the word was gentle and absolute. You may stand beside me when your truth is needed. You may not stand in front of me as if my voice were a fragile thing. He took that in. As you wish. Do not say that like a servant. For the first time since entering, something almost human crossed his mouth. How shall I say it? Like a man learning. His gaze lowered, then returned. As you wish. This time the words had no disguise in them. Footsteps hurried in the corridor. Mrs. Arden turned before the knock came. A maid opened the door with a face drained of colour and a bundle clutched in both hands. Forgive me, madam. Forgive me, miss. Her ladyship said everyone is to gather in the drawing-room at once. Elspeth rose slowly. The bundle was her own shawl, the dove-grey one folded around something square and hard. The maid swallowed. It was found in Miss Loring's room again. Mrs. Arden stood. Found by whom? Miss Penrith's maid, madam. She said it was beneath the chair by the dressing table. Elspeth stepped forward and took the shawl herself. The weight inside was unmistakable. The small iron seal box. Planted again, and this time so crudely that desperation showed through the folds. Adrian's face had gone cold, but he did not reach for it. He waited. That mattered. Elspeth held the bundle against her palms and felt fear settle into something cleaner than courage. Good, she said. Then they have given me the shape of their lie twice. Adrian looked at her. Miss Loring. She met his eyes, and this time she did not speak to a servant or a duke, but to the man who would have to earn both names honestly. Come if you mean to tell the truth. Stay behind if you mean to arrange it. Then she turned toward the drawing-room, carrying the seal box like evidence, no longer willing to obey its owner. The drawing-room had been made ready for a victory Lady Penrith still believed she could command. Chairs faced inward in a neat crescent. The curtains had been drawn wide to admit the hard afternoon light. Tea stood untouched on a side table, cooling beside cups no one had the composure to lift. Lady Penrith stood near the hearth with Viola beside her, one hand resting on her daughter's shoulder like affection and warning combined. Lord Penrith hovered by the mantel, pale around the mouth. Sir Barnaby Cresswell sat too straight in a chair he seemed to regret choosing. The two young ladies from the house party kept close together, their curiosity frightened into silence. Mr. Peveril waited near the writing desk with his dispatch case closed, and Mr. Eddowes stood behind Adrian with the grave stillness of a man who had carried proof far enough. When Elspeth entered with a shawl-wrapped seal box in both hands, Adrian came beside her but not before her. That small restraint gave her more strength than any dramatic defence would have done. Lady Penrith's gaze dropped to the bundle. My dear Elspeth, she said, with sorrow polished to a shine, I had hoped you would accept quiet assistance before matters became impossible to soften. Elspeth placed the shawl on the centre table and unfolded it. The iron box sat exposed in the light, dark, compact, and almost ugly in its plainness. I have been softened enough, she said. Viola's mouth tightened. Lady Penrith lifted her brows. Is that how you speak to the woman who sheltered you? No, Elspeth replied. It is how I speak to the woman who used shelter as a lock. The room went still. Mrs. Arden entered behind her, cane in hand, and settled near the window with visible satisfaction. Proceed, Miss Loring, she said. The lock has been mentioned. Let us see whether it likes attention. Lady Penrith's face hardened. "This box was found in your room." "Twice," Elspeth said. "The first time beneath my shawl in my trunk. The second time wrapped in the same shawl and placed beneath a chair. Whoever arranged it was either careless or desperate. You imply conspiracy because guilt frightens you." "No. I imply design because objects are often more honest than people." Elspeth lifted the box, careful not to touch the lock. "My reticule has a small brass clasp. My trunk key is narrow and smooth. This lock has scratches around the keyhole from a heavier key with a broken edge. I saw the same rough marks yesterday on the drawer beneath the eastern window in Lord Penrith's study, where the estate accounts are kept." Lord Penrith flinched before he could prevent it. The movement was small, but the room had learned to notice small things. Lady Penrith turned sharply. "George!" He looked away. Elspeth placed the box down again. "I did not know what the marks meant when I saw them. I know now they matter because someone wished this box to look as if it belonged in my possession while leaving on it every sign that it did not." Lady Penrith laughed once. "How inventive. You have become remarkably skilled in locks overnight. Poverty teaches one to notice what richer people call accidents." Adrian moved only when Elspeth looked at him. He placed 3 papers on the table. Not a stack large enough to turn the room into a court. Just enough to make denial breathe harder. "These letters were sent in imitation of my hand," he said. "This note was meant to suggest an understanding I never gave. Mr. Peveril will say no more than is necessary." The solicitor opened his case and removed a single folded page. "Lord Penrith's creditors pressed payment within the month. A connection with his grace would have restored confidence. That is all the room needs to understand motive." Lord Penrith's lips parted. No defense came. Lady Penrith's eyes flashed toward the solicitor. "Private accounts do not make forgery." "No," Mrs. Arden said. "They merely explain why one might become suddenly fond of a duke." A faint rustle moved through the guests. It was not laughter. It was society withdrawing permission to be fooled. Lady Penrith sensed it and turned on Viola. "My daughter is innocent of these unpleasant arrangements. If girlish hope has been misunderstood, blame a mother's anxiety, not a child's heart." Viola looked at her, startled. "Mamma." "Be quiet, my love." "But you said," Lady Penrith's fingers tightened on Viola's shoulder. "I said be quiet." The command broke something that fear had kept sealed. Viola pulled away, color rising and draining at once. "You said his grace wouldn't declare himself unless the house expected it. You said gentlemen hate embarrassment more than marriage. You said if a note was found near his chamber, he would have to be honorable." Lady Penrith's face went white. "Viola, you are overwrought." "You told me to mention the corridor," Viola said, her voice shaking now. "You told me to say Elspeth was always near the footman. You said people would believe it because she has no fortune and everyone thinks poor women must be wanting something." The words did not shout. They did worse. They arrived clearly. One of the young ladies covered her mouth. Sir Barnaby lowered his head. Lord Penrith reached for the mantle as if stone might steady him. Lady Penrith stared at her daughter with a hatred too naked to be maternal. "You foolish girl." Viola recoiled. Elspeth felt no triumph. She felt the ache of hearing cruelty named exactly. Adrian's hand moved slightly at his side, then stilled. He did not touch her. He had learned the difference between comfort and claim. Lord Penrith spoke at last, his voice thin. "Augusta, enough." Lady Penrith turned on him. "Do not you dare pretend innocence." "I did not place the box in her room," he said. "But it came from my study." The admission entered the room like a door opening onto cold air. "I knew you had taken the seal. I knew letters were being discussed. I did not know you meant to put theft on the girl." "The girl," Elspeth said. The quiet correction stopped him more effectively than anger. He looked at her. For the first time, he seemed to see not a useful dependent, not a household inconvenience, but a person standing before him with a name he had helped in danger. "Miss Loring," he said, hoarsely. "Yes," she replied. "That is my name." Sir Barnaby rose awkwardly. His face was flushed with shame. Miss Loring, I made sport of your position at breakfast. I thought myself amusing. I was not. I'm sorry. It was a small apology, clumsy and late. Yet it mattered because it was spoken where the insult had been enjoyed. Elspeth inclined her head. Thank you, Sir Barnaby. Lady Penrith looked around the drawing-room and saw what Elspeth saw. No one stood with her now. The young ladies had drawn nearer to Mrs. Arden's side of the room. Sir Barnaby remained standing but would not meet Lady Penrith's eyes. Lord Penrith had folded into silence. Viola sat with both hands pressed over her handkerchief, no longer pretty enough to protect the lie. Lady Penrith's power had always depended on others accepting her version before they examined their own discomfort. That power had left her in inches. You all judge very eagerly, she said. I acted for my child. You acted for position, Elspeth said. And when position required a sacrifice, you chose the woman least able to answer. Lady Penrith's mouth trembled with fury. Do you imagine this makes you equal to us? Elspeth looked at the seating of the room, at the table with the note, the letters, the seal box, and the old brass button lying beside them. No. I imagine it makes me free of needing your measure. Mrs. Arden rose. Lady Penrith, you have lost the room. I advise silence. It may be the only dignity left to you. No one contradicted her. Adrian stepped beside Elspeth then, not in front. His voice was quiet, but every person heard it. Miss Loring is innocent of the charges made against her. She refused a lie when obedience would have been safer. She defended the defenseless when society expected her to protect herself. She has been treated as though dependence made her disposable. That judgment ends here. He turned to Elspeth, and all the ducal authority in him softened into restraint. I will not ask anything from you in payment for justice. Not forgiveness. Not gratitude. Not affection. But when you are away from this house, under Mrs. Arden's protection or any other you choose, may I call upon you properly and try to earn the trust one damaged? Elspeth looked at him for a long moment. The room waited, but for once she did not answer for the room. She answered for herself. You may call, she said. You may not presume. Relief moved through his eyes, deep and controlled. I wouldn't dare. Mrs. Arden gave a satisfied nod. At last, a sensible man says a sensible thing. The guests began to move then, slowly, as if leaving a room that had changed while they sat inside it. This time, they did not make Elspeth step aside. They made room for her. As she passed the centre table, Adrian picked up the old brass button and held it out on his open palm. Elspeth took it, not as proof now, not as debt, but as a choice returned to the hand that had first refused to let a small broken thing be ignored. 3 months after Lady Penrith lost the room at Fenbridge Court, her card was returned unopened from a London hostess who had once borrowed her guest list and praised her judgment. Mrs. Arden reported this fact over tea with the severity of a woman announcing a national victory while pretending it bored her. 3 drawing rooms in 1 week, she said, setting down her cup at her Bath lodgings. That is not exile, but it's an excellent beginning. Elspeth, seated by the window with the old brass button in her palm, did not smile as triumphantly as Mrs. Arden perhaps deserved. She felt justice, but not the sharp pleasure Lady Penrith would have taken in another woman's fall. Lord Penrith's creditors had pressed through proper channels, and the cheerful laughter he had once used to cover anxiety had vanished from reports of him. Viola had been sent to a relative in Bath, where she appeared at church with lowered eyes and no sapphires. Elspeth wished her neither ruin nor reward. She wished only that Viola might one day learn the cost of being loved as an ambition instead of as a daughter. The first time Adrian called at Mrs. Arden's house, he came with a card, a proper hour, and enough restraint to make Mrs. Arden say, "You may sit, Your Grace, if you remember that chairs are not declarations." He sat across from Elspeth and spoke for 20 minutes about Mrs. Arden's rheumatism, the state of the roads, and a leak in the west roof at Rookmere Hall. He did not mention Fenbridge until Elspeth did. "Do you always avoid what matters most?" she asked. "No," he said. "Only when I'm afraid of asking for too much." She looked down at her tea. "Then ask for less." He did. He asked whether he might call again. She said no the first week, because her heart had not yet forgiven the speed with which fear could become gratitude. He bowed and did not look injured. The second week, he sent a note to Mrs. Arden, not Elspeth, asking whether a visit would be acceptable. Elspeth allowed 10 minutes. He stayed 9. The third week, he brought the settlement paper again and placed it before her without touching her hand. "This remains yours," he said. "Whether you marry, refuse me, go to London, or decide that Bath deserves your permanent correction. You make independent sound very solemn. It is solemn to me. Why? Because I don't want your yes if need is holding your hand." That was the day Elspeth signed. Not because she had chosen him, but because she had chosen herself first. After that, the courtship became quieter and more dangerous. Adrian asked what sort of house made women disappear. Elspeth answered that houses did not disappear women. People did, using rooms, errands, gratitude, and silence. A week later, he brought her a list from Rookmere Hall, not of jewels or carriages, but of 3 unused rooms near the South Garden, and asked whether they might serve as apartments for gentlewomen in need of temporary shelter. Elspeth read the list twice before looking at him. "You are asking me to design refuge before you ask me to be its mistress. I'm asking whether Rookmere may learn from you, even if you never choose to belong to it." She did not answer then. Some answers required more than breath. The wedding came on a clear morning in late summer at the village church 2 miles from Rookmere Hall. It was not hidden, but it was not staged as conquest. Mrs. Arden sat in the front pew with a handkerchief she insisted was for dust. Mr. Peveril attended with dry satisfaction. Mr. Iddowes stood near the back and looked at Adrian with the weary pride of a man whose worst fears had not prevented the best outcome. Sir Barnaby sent a silver tea service far too large for good taste and a note to Miss Loring, not to the Duchess she would become, apologizing again for having laughed before he had understood. No one from Fenbridge Court attended. Elspeth did not look for them. When Adrian placed the ring on her finger, his voice was steady until the word honour. It caught there, once, almost too softly for anyone else to hear. Elspeth heard. She understood that between them honour was not decoration for vows. It was the road back from injury. After the service, the carriage carried them beneath beech trees toward Rookmere Hall. Elspeth sat opposite Adrian at first, as propriety had trained her even after vows had altered the world. He looked at her, then at the seat beside him, and did not ask. She moved when she was ready. Outside, fields rolled green under the wide Hampshire sky. Sheep grazed beyond low stone walls. The old tower of Rookmere appeared first, narrow and grey, rising above the roofs like the crest on the button in her pocket. A bird above a tower. A house that had once hidden its master in old livery now waited to receive its mistress through the front doors. Adrian noticed her hand move toward the pocket of her travelling cloak. "Is it there?" he asked. "Yes. I wondered whether you would keep it. I kept it to remind myself that small things tell the truth when people make too much noise. Then it deserves a better setting than my old coat. Perhaps. But not a prettier meaning." His eyes softened, and he looked away before feeling became presumption. At the entrance, the household stood assembled on the steps and across the hall. Mrs. Bell, the housekeeper, curtsied deeply with the keys at her waist. The butler bowed. Maids, footmen, and grooms stood in ordered lines, curious but respectful. No one asked Elspeth to stand aside while someone more important passed. No one placed a shawl over her arm. No one gave her a task to justify her presence. Adrian stepped down first and offered his hand. It was there if she wanted it. Not a command. Not a rescue. Elspeth placed her gloved fingers over his and descended. Mrs. Bell curtsied again. "Your Grace, welcome home." For a moment, the words did not enter as language. They entered as restoration. The sideboard at Fenbridge. The open passage. The false note. The cold shape of the seal box. Lady Penrith's voice saying women with uncertain futures had only discretion left. All of it stood behind Elspeth and did not vanish, but it no longer directed where she might stand. "Thank you, Mrs. Bell," she said. "I hope to make Rookmere a house where welcome is not measured by fortune." "Mrs. Bell's eyes warmed. His Grace said you would begin with the truest sentence in the hall. Elspeth looked at Adrian. Did he? I said you would improve us before luncheon, Adrian replied. I may have understated the case. Mrs. Arden, who had arrived ahead of them and claimed a chair near the hearth as if conquering territory, lifted her cane. Enough prettiness. Show her the south rooms before every servant here starts admiring her and becomes useless. Elspeth laughed. The sound rose into the hall, free and unexpected. Later, when the household had been greeted and the south rooms had been opened to sunlight, Elspeth stood with Adrian in the small west parlour. On the table lay the old brass button. She had taken it from her pocket and set it beside the household keys, not to hide the past, but to place it where it could no longer be used against her. Adrian stood at a respectful distance, though they were husband and wife now. You may come nearer, she said. He did, slowly. I still don't want to presume. Good, she said. Remember that. His mouth curved. Always. Elspeth picked up the button. The dark thread she had sewn still crossed the worn metal, imperfect and strong. I once thought a home was a place where one was permitted to stay. And now? Now I think it is a place where one is not required to disappear. Adrian's face changed. The cold control that had once made him seem unreachable gave way to something quieter and more enduring. Then Rookmere will be that place, if I spend my life learning how. Elspeth placed the button in his palm and folded his fingers over it. I loved your dignity before I knew your title. He looked down at their joined hands. And I chose my wife on the day she defended a servant no one else would defend. Outside, the village bells began to ring across the fields. Inside Rookmere Hall, the new Duchess of Alderwick stood beside her husband in a room full of late summer light, with the old brass button between their hands, the doors open before them, and no lie left powerful enough to send her back into shadow.